Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 7 transfer plans. I'll quickly review Game Week 6 and we'll run through that. So, I can already expect it. If you want to go and make some sort of insulting comments about Bruno, feel free to do that. This is probably the best video to do that. I'll respond to probably none of these comments this week. I did decide actually going on a Bruno draft, which actually kept Trent in my team for Game Week 6 and my wild card. And as a result of it, of course, I got Bruno and Trent as opposed to, let's say, Leif Davis plus Cole Palmer, which was something that I was thinking about with some of my previous draft variations. Now, obviously, as it turns out, it's probably 25, 30 points down. I imagine I could have even played Guardiola here in this situation, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, use this as a free space to do what you want to do. I'm pretty over talking about, let's say, FPL decisions. I think I've explained during the week sort of why I had different drafts in my mind and the priority I had in certain players. I think Trent and Palmer were very much close in priority. As it turns out, Palmer scored 4 goals. This happens sometimes, very rarely, of course. So once again, Cole Palmer is a once-in-a-lifetime player, and he did amazing. And then Trent, unfortunately, lost his clean sheet and got a yellow card. So that's that. And then Bruno also got a red card. So that's that. That was the decision I went for. However, we did end up going Solanke as well, and only double Arsenal because within a Trent Guardiola Lewis structure, I thought that I didn't really need that Arsenal defender, particularly since there were some doubts about Raya, and I didn't really want to gamble whether he would start or not. Obviously, as it turned out, Raya did start, so it's very plausible that if we had better information, I would have been on a Raya draft and things would have been different, but that's that. I'm sitting here with 34 points. The rank right now, I believe, is 1.8 million, probably going to be 1.9 million, I would say, probably going to be 2 million or below after Semenyo plays, and I'm sure a lot of people have Semenyo in the draft right now, and that could be even Evan Nilsson as well doing well tomorrow, but that's that. As far as the team structure itself, I'm very happy with it still. I did make a decision between Lewis and Guardiola, and all I'll say is that in the positions that I've seen Lewis play before this game, this season, I thought that the positions that he took up were extremely encouraging. And to be fair, even in the match, when we saw the lineup as well, I was pretty happy with it. Guardiola, however, played, I would say, a slightly different role, a bit of a niche role for Guardiola. But we know that he can play such roles because he's a very, very specific style of player. And I think Man City Tactics Twitter account made a good sort of detailing about that Guardiola role within the game, if you want to have a read. Otherwise, it was not a great decision, right? 7 points down there. And I've already talked about Bruno. So as far as the decisions go, look, this is the wild card. I have to deal with it. I have Bruno out for 3 games now. I have to make decisions, and that's my transfer plans and how I'm going to orient my transfer plans. Now, if you actually went with, let's say, the Palmer draft that I suggested at the start of the week, I think you'd be in a very, very happy spot right now. I imagine there's nothing to do with your teams. But in my position, clearly, of course, one free transfer is an option or rolling is an option. I'll first of all discuss what happens if I roll, because it is plausible that I could field out a competent FPL team for next week if I roll, right? So Bruno's definitely not going to play. Dunk will be for a sub, and then Dibbling's playing versus Arsenal, so, really no interest in him whatsoever. Gabriel, Lewis, Trent, Guardiola seem like they could all start. I think that's very plausible, particularly with how poorly Walker's playing as well. Flecken in the team, another good fixture. Mbumo, Saka, Rogers with a little bit of a knock of sorts, I would say, within the Aston Villa game. Really good to see him score. Really good player. Really happy I kept him on the wildcard draft. In the front line, DCL, Solanke, Haaland. Solanke matched Havertz, which was something that I was really happy about. I wasn't too happy about the concessions that I had to give on a Havertz draft compared to a Solanke draft, and part of that is because of the Havertz price rise. Kind of squeezed me 0.1 out of some of the teams that I really liked on the wildcard. So I went with Solanke in the end. It was actually something that I thought was quite nice because with Son being out, we think that, or at least I think that Solanke is the penalty taker of the team. And now looking ahead towards a Brighton fixture with how poor Brighton were without Jean-Paul Van Heck last week, gotta say, they look like a team to target. Calvert-Lewin, Newcastle have been pretty poor, although really good at home. This time they're away from home. Are Everton any good as a team? Probably not. But then I think a lot of people tend to make the argument about DCL versus Wood. And I would generally say that on team strengths, I don't think there's too much in it between the actual offense of Everton versus Nottingham Forest, where Nottingham Forest have probably shown to be markedly better, so far this season at least, is definitely on defense. Is Wood better than Calvert-Lewin in isolation? Yes, but I think the fixture run is still generally better. So this is the type of game week where I hope Calvert-Lewin would be able to do something. He's also playing 95 minutes a game, so some value sometimes can come from players playing 95 minutes a game and being penalty takers. Otherwise, if I really feel like, for example, let's say Rodgers has a doubt, he doesn't play the Bayern Munich game in the Champions League, or if I look at Lewis, for example, and I think he might not even start, clearly this team is very, very weak, right? The auto subs aren't fantastic. And the question is, what happens if I roll? Do I make better moves? Because one of the issues with the Bruno spot is that unless I move towards Palmer, which is definitely through Trent, what can I do? So let's quickly have a look at what kind of variations of teams that I could possibly go for over the next few game weeks. All right, so we're back here with the hub client. Clearly, we know that Bruno's not going to play, so it's a case of basically Lewis coming in, and it's not a very strong team. I think the immediate transfer option for one free transfer from Bruno has to be, in my opinion, Bowen. Now, Bowen is someone who I think a lot of people will take issue with again, right? Because it kind of feels like the same sort of situation. You're moving from one player from a bad team to another player from a bad team. But I think the point that I would make about Bowen last year is he did perfectly well in FPL despite playing in a bad team. And despite West Ham's league position, I'd argue that they performed really poorly on underlying stats. This is the same case as this season. West Ham find themselves close towards the bottom of the table when it comes to expected goals as a team. And so far, it has not looked so good under Lopetegui, but they have played teams like Chelsea, Liverpool, and Man City, right? So it has been a tough run of fixtures. The next game is Ipswich at home. So Bowen is definitely someone that I'm considering. Eze is also someone that I'm considering, which is the sort of main dominant AI transfer suggestion here. Gordon is interesting, but I still think that the fixtures are tough. I would be more enthused about Gordon as a pick if we knew for sure that Isak would be out for multiple game weeks, right? Because that means that you're seeing more of Gordon up top, central, and you're seeing more of Gordon on pens, which is amazing. So these are definitely options that I'm thinking about, all of them. But I do think Bowen is nice because, okay, when you look at the fixture here, Ipswich at home is actually really good. But then I actually also have someone like Tyler Dibling who can play in game week 8 where he has a tough fixture, which is Tottenham away. But so that's an option. Now, if I decide to not go for a transfer here, let's say I actually keep Bruno in the team, then what happens in this scenario is that I would just roll. I would play this pretty flimsy team, but actually it actually has a pretty decent team rating here. And then in game week 8, presumably I take one price drop for Bruno, which is not ideal. I actually don't really love this. Then in this situation, I would actually take Bruno out of my team. I'd bring Son in, and I have some playroom, right? I can probably move off of Gabriel, which I know a lot of people will struggle with the idea, but the reality is it's Bournemouth away. That's a good fixture, but then it's Liverpool and Newcastle, which are tough fixtures. So then I could definitely move Gabriel into someone in that sort of 4.5 spot. It might actually be someone like a Van de Ven, right? Especially if I do choose to not go for someone like Porro later down the line. Van de Ven is definitely an option that I can think about as a pick, who I actually think still has a good fixture here and maybe a little bit underrated by the algorithm, maybe because there's a little bit of suspicion that he's not fully fit as a player. So that's actually one of the options. There's plenty of 4.5s that do exist in the game that I think I can definitely consider. But the issue here, of course, is that it's very tight for me, right? So unfortunately, Son is not someone that I can really afford if Bruno does drop. So that is one of the issues with rolling this week and why I don't like rolling the free transfer. Because, okay, if I don't go for Van de Ven, then maybe I actually go for someone like Mykolenko. And then the question is, can a team of Mykolenko, Doug, Guardiola, Trent, and Lewis sustain itself over the next few game weeks? Possibly it can, but I might not have the same faith in, let's say, Mykolenko compared to a strong 4.5 option playing for a better team and a better defense. Because if there's anything I can give credit to Spurs this season, I think is that they actually just generally look like a better team on both ends of the pitch. So that's why Van de Ven is an intriguing pick. And of course, if I take maybe one or two price drops, then this is not an ideal situation. So that's why I'm not extremely sold on the idea. And we can sort of bring Bruno back here. And going back to game week 7, I do think that the aggressive move is to go for Cole Palmer. Now, Palmer clearly has some weak fixtures, but I would be going out of Trent and doing the same sort of approach. Maybe this time I'd be going for someone like a Leif Davis. Leif Davis is one of the few 4.5s that I do like a lot. And I do think that he generally is someone that I feel quite comfortable playing on most game weeks because even though Ipswich are a poor defense, he is an extremely offensive pick. So when you look at a game today where they conceded 2 goals to Aston Villa, he was still within the bonus because of how offensive he is as a player and how many chances he constantly creates. If there's ever a sort of 1 in 10 chance that, let's say, I get an Ipswich clean sheet, we know that Davis is more likely to get a haul, and he always gets good chances per game. So that's why I do like Davis as a pick. This also gives me a bit of breathing room because I know that Palmer will rise. I know that Bruno might fall. And this is something that I think is generally in my head, right? This way, I bring Palmer into the team. I confirm that. And if I optimize the team, it's looking pretty good in terms of how the team looks like in this situation in game week 7. So I do quite like this transfer option quite a fair bit. This way, I think that, okay, the next 3 fixtures for Palmer are 2 out of 3 good, I would say. 1 is clearly quite poor versus Liverpool. But the idea here is to go into Cole Palmer, someone that I would generally not transfer out for the foreseeable future. And that would be also me almost saying to myself that I made the wrong decision, that I went for Trent on the wild card, and actually he's not a long-term hold. The reason why I might consider a move like this is because, unfortunately, there aren't too many players in the price point that Bruno is in that I can move from for one free transfer that I really like. So that's why I was also thinking that in an alternative situation, if I just sort of re-simulate my team, what I have left in terms of breathing room for my team is actually to go for an Arsenal midfielder for 2 game weeks to take a punt, right? If I think that Palmer ultimately doesn't have the best of games over the next 6 fixtures, because we know that the fixtures, especially after Newcastle at home, are a little bit tougher for Chelsea, I can take this opportunity to maybe move into someone that's very risky in terms of the minutes, because there is a lot of Arsenal depth right now. We know that Mika Marino will probably come back after the international break. So it's basically between 2 options, Martinelli or Trossard, as basically a 2 or 3 game week punt. And then I can revisit options later down the line. Presumably, if I go for this sort of transfer move, I would be moving into Palmer at around game week 12. Because actually, if we go back to looking at Palmer, for example, and just looking at his fixtures, we know that the fixtures are a little bit worse after game week 9, right? It's Man United away, fine. That actually might look like a good fixture, but then it's Arsenal, then it's Leicester, but then it's Aston Villa at home. So generally, it's not exactly amazing. And that's the sort of situation here as well. I would, of course, also skip the Liverpool fixture, which is quite crucial if I skip Palmer in this sort of landscape. So that is something to think about. Do I just bring Palmer back in on game week 12 instead, and then sort of skip United away, Liverpool away, Arsenal at home? That could be an ideal situation, but that's one of the issues right now. I need to decide whether Trent is that sort of premium pick, because if we look at Trent's fixtures, game week 7, it looks mediocre and it's red, but I still think it's actually really good. Crystal Palace away, they looked pretty inoffensive. Then it's Chelsea at home. I don't think I'm expecting too much from Trent. It is a home game though, so that's nice. But then he will have Arsenal, and then in the distance, he'll have Man City as well. But there are good fixtures, right? 10, 11, 12 right now look absolutely great for Trent. So then the question, of course, in my situation is, do I think Trent is worth the move away? So here, if I go for Trent and leave Davis, that's one option. But as I said, if I go for Trent, then the option here right now is to simply go for someone like Martinelli, where I think this season we've seen Martinelli benched once. We've seen Martinelli play around 75 to 80 minutes per game. He was subbed off in the previous game at around 77 minutes, I believe. And he seems like he could be generally a good punt for the next 2 game weeks, and then I can ship him back into someone else. So those are the moves that I'm actually thinking about right now. Clearly, this is not the best wildcard played. Even if I go back to my Game Week 5 team, the reality is that I probably would have captained Mo Salah due to the sort of Wolves sickness news. I would have probably reluctantly played Vardy, Konsa, Lewis, Pedro Porro, and Trent. That wasn't realistic. I wildcarded and sort of made the intention to wildcard very early, but this is what happens in FPL from time to time. I've played enough seasons to know that you can have bad game weeks and you can bounce back from them. Last season, I did exactly that. After my own wildcard went kaput in my wildcard 2 for game week 26. And after that, we were able to recover even after a minus 16. So I've had sort of experiences of ups and downs in FPL. I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable making decisions. Process-wise, the reality is that the Bruno suspension has forced a transfer on me. And it is hilarious, of course. I guess some people believing in some cost fallacy. Reality is I still think Bruno is actually a half-decent pick in FPL. And I was happy to have him in my team, mostly because I quite like the idea of going for Trent for the foreseeable future. But things do feel quite forced, because now without someone that I really like as a free transfer option for Bruno, like, for example, Bowen, maybe probably being one of the top options, Eze as well, it does feel like that a -4 could be very worthwhile for me. So those are my transfer plans right now. Let me know what your thoughts are. I would personally right now lean towards making a transfer, as I said, because if I roll, one of the issues with the price falls that Bruno will bring over the next 2 weeks is that I will be very restricted in terms of my options. I won't also have the flexibility to maybe make better moves, but I will have 2 free transfers. And sometimes 2 free transfers will always be nice. But the reality is also, as I said, Bruno is suspended for 3 games. And so if he's suspended for 3 games, I have to deal with that. There's no other way around it. So ultimately, I either choose to make some moves this week, capitalize on the fact that Palmer still has a really good fixture this week, or I ignore Palmer ultimately, as I said, up until game week 12. So let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Hope you guys are doing much better than myself. If you have a red arrow, I have to say that I've played enough FPL to have extremely bad red arrows. I've had probably worse red arrows than this, and I've been 30, 40 points below the safety score a couple times. Last season, free at 34 was a good example of that. But you keep moving on, you keep making good moves on paper, and you see where Lady Luck smiles on you. And this week it didn't, so that's okay. I'm very happy about the way the team looks going forwards, as long as I make one of the 2 moves that I really planned for. Otherwise, of course, still happy with the team. A lot of people are actually selling Lewis, and I wanted to comment on that before I actually sort of ended the video. I don't really think Lewis is a sell, right? Yes, of course, you can make the arguments about how this team looks worse without Rodri, and that's fair, right? We always knew that this team was going to be worse without Rodri, but how much worse is a very significant and fair question to ask. I don't see, for example, City out of the title race. I still think that their fixtures are amazing in the short term, so why be so worried is sort of my go-to or gut reaction to it. As things stand, I can play a back 4 this week if Rodgers is fine, but I am actually pressed, and I think, to move out of Bruno just because of the idea of these price rises and falls pinching me a little bit harder. I was willing to take 1 price drop for Bruno because I was able to take 0.1 back for Luis Diaz. Am I looking at someone like Luis Diaz right now? Absolutely not, because I still think that ultimately Gakpo is a very serious threat to his minutes, and Liverpool's fixtures are very much like when we looked at Trent's fixtures. You know, they're passable up until game week 10 again, where we think that Liverpool actually have 3 good fixtures in a row. So those are my thoughts right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys had a better week than myself. Take care and goodbye, and have a good week ahead.